Hello, you're watching A News. I'm Nadia Jani. Here are your top stories. Israel receives one more deceased hostage body from Hamas. Britain's Prince Andrew gives up royal titles due to the Epstein files. And US-China trade talks to take place next week in Malaysia to curb tariff tensions. The body of another Israeli hostage has been returned from Gaza as part of a US brokered deal between Israel and Hamas. The transfer comes amid mounting tensions over delays in recovering the remains of those killed during the October 7th, 2023 attack.
A convoy transporting the remains of a hostage returned by Hamas arrived at the National Center of Forensic Medicine in Tel Aviv early Saturday. Earlier in the day, Israel said the Red Cross had transferred the body of another deceased hostage from Gaza to Israeli authorities. The exchange took place amid ongoing tensions over delays in the repatriation of remains under the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. On Friday, Hamas's armed wing announced that a newly recovered body would be handed over that night. This marks the 10th deceased hostage returned to Israel out of the 28 bodies held in Gaza. Hamas has said it requires heavy machinery and excavation equipment to recover more remains buried under rubble, while Israel maintains that the group already knows the locations of the bodies. In Khan Yunis, heavy equipment was seen on Friday as crews continued searching for the bodies of hostages believed to have been killed after being abducted during Hamas's October 7th, 2023 attack. The recovery operation is part of a US-mediated deal to end the two-year Gaza conflict. Under the agreement, Hamas has released 20 surviving and 28 deceased hostages, is set to be depatriated in exchange for nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. The Israeli military said Hamas has so far handed over 10 coffins, one not belonging to an Israeli hostage, with 19 remains still unaccounted for.
Staying on the subject, there's also been fury in Israel that Hamas has not returned all of the bodies in line with last week's ceasefire deal, though the US has downplayed the suggestion it amounts to a breach. Joining me now to discuss this is Yossi Kopawasa, who is the head of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
My first question is, the dead hostages are slowly being returned back to Israel under the ceasefire agreement. However, many of the families are upset and protesting on Saturday for the remaining 18 hostages to be returned. Why has this become such a difficult process?
Well, according to the agreement, they were supposed to bring back the 20 living hostages and the bodies of the 28 deceased ones within 72 hours after we withdrew from the areas that we were supposed to withdraw from. And this was not happening, and this is causing a lot of frustration and anger amongst the families of the hostages, especially those who have not been able yet to see the bodies of their beloved ones. But not only them, everybody in Israel is furious about that, because we believe that Hamas knows the whereabouts of most of the deceased bodies, and could have bring them much sooner, and they still know where many of those who are missing are, and refuse to bring them back on time. It's unacceptable from our point of view, and it's frustrating. Not that we are going to launch a war because of that, but it's really frustrating. The families are waiting, and they were so much hoping that the time has come for them to bring their loved ones to a proper burial, and this doesn't happen.
Yes, and I'm sure Hamas is working, as they have been, to get the remaining hostages, those ones that have passed away, back to their families.
They don't.
My next question, though.
I'm sorry, but they don't do what they need to do. If they did what they wanted, what they needed to do, we would have had already some more bodies. They don't. What they are trying to do is to gain more time that they are using in order to improve their control of the Gaza Strip and settling the account of with their opponents, executing all kinds of Palestinians they don't like. That's what's happening in Gaza right now.
Well, right now, there's not been any journalists able to actually go in and actually confirm what you've just said right now. As you know, Israel has stopped any further access, so we won't go down that route. But my second question is, there has been more calls to open crossings into Gaza for humanitarian aid. And I just want to find out, why do you think Israel might be dragging its feet in regards to opening more crossings into Gaza?
No, we were not supposed to open more crossing. We were supposed to open one major crossing, which is the Rafah crossing, to enable the food and the other humanitarian materials coming in. And we are waiting for Hamas to keep up their commitments and release the bodies of the hostages before we allow more humanitarian aid coming in. We allow enough humanitarian aid to come in the extent that is necessary for the population of Gaza. But according to the agreement, we were supposed to enter even more than that, 600 trucks a day. And this is going to be implemented once they bring back all the hostages. They are not doing that, and that's why we delay the entry of the 600 trucks that we are supposed to do.
One of Israel's foreign ministers actually said that the Rafah crossing could possibly open on Sunday. Is that something you believe Israel wants to maintain their bargaining, basically their end of the agreement with regards to the ceasefire agreements that was done between Hamas, US, and other actors?
There are two questions here: whether the crossing is going to be open. In addition to the crossing in Kerem Shalom that we allow material to come in, but this is going to be another crossing. So there's one question whether it's going to be open, and the other question is how many trucks are going to cross through the crossing. We are going to open it on Sunday, as you mentioned, but the question is how many trucks are going to cross. I still don't know.
Well, there's been mention that there's many trucks waiting to cross over into Gaza in order to provide medical assistance, aid, etc. But my next question would actually be now, Hamas unfortunately has accused Israel of breaching the ceasefire and says that it's killed up to 24 people in the last couple of days. Do you think the ceasefire will hold?
Well, I think the ceasefire will hold because it's in the interest of all parties involved to have a ceasefire. But the complaints of Hamas are unbased because what happened was that terrorists from the Hamas were trying to infiltrate into the area under our control in Gaza these days. 53% of Gaza are beyond what's called the yellow line that are under Israeli control now, according to the agreement. And those terrorists were trying to cross into this area in order to settle accounts either with us or with all kinds of clans that operate in the areas we control. And we had to defend ourselves and the clans by taking action against those terrorists that were up to something that was unacceptable from our point of view.
And where do you think we can go from here in regards to the release of hostages and obviously going from the ceasefire agreement that was agreed to the next stages of this process?
Well, the next stage of the process should be, after the releasing all the hostages and resuming the aid, should be Hamas disarming itself and laying down their arms. As far as we hear from Hamas until now, they're not going to do that. They refuse to do that. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on them, asking them to disarm. President Trump repeatedly said this, if they're not going to do that of their own will, there's going to be a military operation in order to force them to give up their weapons. We shall wait and see. For the time being, they refuse. There's an effort by the mediators and by the United States and by Israel to convince them to do that. We have to understand there's two layers here. One layer is who's going to govern Gaza. They don't want to give up governing Gaza. And the other layer is that if they lay down their arms, they actually admit that 7th of October was a mistake from their point of view. And this is something that's very difficult for them to admit because this is a battle over the narrative. And they don't want to be accused of causing all this damage to themselves and to the Palestinians in Gaza. So they are fighting for the narrative, and I think it's going to be very difficult to convince them to give up their arms, and we might get the entire plan stuck on that issue.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your insight and for joining me today, Mr. Kapawasa. Thank you. Now over in the UK, Prince Andrew says he will no longer use his royal title, the Duke of York, after years of public criticism over his conduct and business associations. The move marks the latest step in his long fall from grace. Here's the full story.
Britain's Prince Andrew II, son of the late Queen Elizabeth II and younger brother of King Charles, has given up his Duke of York title in a move aimed at ending years of controversy surrounding his name. Once celebrated as a decorated naval officer and one of the most visible members of the royal family, Andrew's public image has been overshadowed for more than a decade, first by his ties to the late US financier Jeffrey Epstein, and later by financial and diplomatic scandals that shook the monarchy. His decision to relinquish the title marks the clearest sign yet of how far his royal standing has fallen. In 2011, Andrew stepped down as the UK's trade ambassador after revelations about his friendship with the late US financier Jeffrey Epstein, who had been convicted of sex offences. 8 years later, a BBC interview meant to clear his name only fueled public outrage and marked the beginning of his fall from grace. Under increasing pressure, the prince withdrew from royal duties, was stripped of military titles and the use of His Royal Highness. In 2022, he settled a US civil lawsuit brought by Virginia Giuffre while continuing to deny all allegations against him. A YouGov survey shows nearly 2/3 of Britain's support removing Andrew's remaining titles, with just a small minority holding a favourable view of him. This week, in a personal statement, the 65-year-old said the continued accusations had become a distraction from his brother King Charles's work and the royal family's public duties.
I have decided, as I always have, to put my duty to my family and country first. With His Majesty's agreement, I will therefore no longer use the title or the honours which have been conferred upon me.
Buckingham Palace confirmed the decision was made in consultation with the King and the Prince of Wales. Andrew will remain a prince but will no longer be known as the Duke of York, a title he received from his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II.
Looking to international diplomacy, US President Donald Trump met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House on Friday, discussing military support for Ukraine, including the potential supply of Tomahawk missiles. Nick Harper has more from Washington, D.C.
The Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky came here to Washington with the hopes of getting his hands on Tomahawk missiles. He's leaving, though, empty-handed. These are the long-range US-made weapons that have the ability to strike far into Russian territory, striking potentially as far as Moscow. And Kyiv has argued for a long time that they need this weaponry to push back against Moscow, that's been carrying out this near-daily bombardment of Ukrainian cities. And of course, if they had those weapons in their arsenal, it could act as leverage to try and force the Russians to the negotiating table. Now, at the start of this week, the US President, Donald Trump, seemed willing to supply those weapons to Ukraine, almost suggesting they could be used as an ultimatum to force Vladimir Putin into a peace deal. But that's all changed, and all changed because of a phone call that took place on Thursday between the US and Russian leader, during which President Putin told President Trump that supplying those weapons to Ukraine would be viewed by the Kremlin as a hostile move and could stand in the way of a peace deal. So, Friday, when Donald Trump sat down with President Zelensky, he made it very clear that he thought it would be an escalation providing those weapons to Ukraine. And he spoke about it in those terms, suggesting that it would be an escalation that could have a negative effect. He went on to say that hopefully we will be able to get the war over with without thinking about Tomahawks. He said, I think we're fairly close to that. He said it would be a big escalation. But he also said that the US needed the Tomahawks because there could be a situation where the US needed to protect itself. He had spoken in the last 24 hours about this idea of depleting US stockpiles. It seems to be an excuse really for handing over those weapons, something that the US president now seems very wary about. But what has also changed is that Donald Trump, during that phone call with President Putin, agreed that the two men would meet in Budapest, the Hungarian capital. Donald Trump said in the next few weeks or so. So President Putin has forced a meeting, but also with that conversation killed off a potential deal where the US would supply Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. It's not clear if that summit in Budapest will produce any results, a ceasefire or a peace plan. Remember, the two leaders met in Alaska in August, and at the time Donald Trump seemed to suggest that a ceasefire was just around the corner, and of course that has not happened. But perhaps Donald Trump's strategy here, and he prides himself on the personal touch, is being able to get in the room with the Russian leader, to speak to him on one-on-one terms and perhaps use something to force the Russian leader to a ceasefire. It's not clear if that will be the case. It may be an instance that the Russian leader is simply buying more time to be able to continue the conflict. But of course, for the Ukrainian leader, it has meant almost a wasted mission to Washington, not getting what he wanted during those conversations on Friday at the White House with the US president. Nick Harper for A News in Washington, D.C.
And those conversations will continue, but with US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. The two leaders are set to meet in the coming weeks, with Hungary emerging as the likely place to hold talks.
Do you have a timeline or a date set for when?
I would say within 2 weeks or so. Pretty quick.
Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are set to meet in the coming weeks, with Hungary suggested as the likely location for the summit. The announcement follows a phone call on the 16th of October, described as productive, where both leaders agreed to discuss the ongoing war in Ukraine. Trump and Putin's relationship has long combined personal diplomacy with strategic tension. Early meetings like Hamburg in 2017 showed polite engagement, while Helsinki in 2018 exposed sharp disagreements.
President Trump's stance on Crimea is well known, and he sticks to it. He speaks about illegal attaching of Crimea to the Russian Federation. We have a different point of view. We think that we held a referendum in strict compliance with the international legislation and the United Nations Charter. For us, for the Russian Federation, this question is closed.
Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have maintained a cautious but ongoing line of communication through both private calls and face-to-face meetings that have drawn global attention. Trump and Putin's post-war encounters have carried weight. The most notable meeting came on the 15th of August 2025 in Alaska, where talks aimed at resolving the Ukraine war failed to produce an agreement. Still, it marked a turning point, showing dialogue between Washington and Moscow remained possible. The upcoming Budapest summit will again focus on Ukraine, covering ceasefire implementation, territorial arrangements and security guarantees. Putin, however, faces an active ICC arrest warrant issued in 2023 over the alleged deportation of Ukrainian children, raising questions about how the fugitive from justice will reach the negotiating table. Each exchange since the invasion underscores the delicate mix of rivalry and diplomacy shaping post-war geopolitics. For Trump, who has highlighted his role in resolving 8 previous international conflicts, this raises the question, could Ukraine be the 9th?
Shifting to other US politics, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said he will meet next week with Chinese Vice Premier Ho Lingfeng to try and prevent a further escalation of US-China trade tensions. Besant made the announcement during a White House cabinet meeting and confirmed the plan following a phone call with Ho Lee Fung on Thursday evening to meet in Malaysia. The pair held frank and detailed video call on trade, planning to continue discussions in person. China's state news agency described the video call as constructive and said a new round of trade talks will take place soon. Previously, President Trump has blamed Beijing for a dispute over rare earth exports and threatened a 100% tariff on Chinese goods from the 1st of November. US President Donald Trump has extended tariff relief for US auto industry. He announced 25% tariffs on imported trucks and parts starting on the 1st of November. The White House has also detailed new tariffs for heavy trucks and buses.
The US auto industry is getting a major boost from Washington. US President Donald Trump has signed new orders granting tariff relief for domestic vehicle and engine production. Starting November 1st, a 25% tariff will apply to imported medium and heavy-duty trucks and parts, and a 10% tariff will target imported buses. The move aims to encourage local manufacturing, with automakers eligible for new tax credits on US-assembled vehicles through 2030. The order provides GM, Ford, Toyota Motor, Stellantis, Honda, Tesla, and other automakers with financial relief against tariffs paid on imported auto parts that were previously imposed by the Trump administration. So far, industry response has been largely positive, as Trump promises the measures will strengthen American production and protect factory jobs.
Turning to central Mexico, where thousands of residents are struggling to survive after deadly floods swept through the region, killing dozens and leaving entire communities submerged. Authorities race to deliver aid and restore basic services. Survivors recount scenes of chaos, hunger and loss.
Devastating floods have swept across eastern and central Mexico, leaving widespread destruction in their wake. Torrential rains have claimed at least 72 lives, with dozens more still missing, while thousands have been left without homes, food, or essential services. On Friday, residents of Alamo in the eastern state of Veracruz were seen queuing for humanitarian aid. Efforts to restore electricity are ongoing, but large parts of the region remain submerged.
Total chaos, everyone without food, without water, without anything or anywhere to sleep. People are coming from Chapapote, a nearby town. There is a constant coming and going of people because they have no homes. They have been left with nothing. Others have homes, but they are full of mud, without water or electricity.
President Claudia Sheinbaum said the floods and landslides, which began last week, have affected 5 states: Veracruz, Hidalgo, Puebla, Querétaro, and San Luis Potosí. According to the president, 48 people remain missing, and around 100,000 homes have been damaged. Veracruz, located along the Gulf of Mexico, is the hardest hit area, with 32 confirmed deaths and dozens of communities in ruins. Veracruz Governor Rocio Nale said 3 municipalities and 37 communities remain cut off. 50 temporary shelters have been set up in the northern part of the state, currently housing more than 4,000 people. More than 58,000 aid packages have been distributed to affected families.
In many neighborhoods, there is no electricity, no communication, and no way to contact family members. You search here and there is no signal. It is difficult to find a place with signal.
The situation in Hidalgo remains particularly severe, with 77 communities still inaccessible. Communication had been lost with 288 villages earlier in the week, but contact has since been re-established with 161 of them.
Here you see people who you never thought would ever go through this, and faced with the situation, they lose their sense of shame. I mean, it's no longer out of choice. It's out of necessity that they come here for a bottle of water, a loaf of bread, a plate of food.
Nearly 9,000 personnel, including Army, Navy and civilian workers, have been deployed in rescue and reconstruction operations across the 5 states. President Sheinbaum is expected to visit the affected areas over the weekend.
Turning to the region now, and German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul has backed expanded defence industry cooperation with Turkey following talks with his Turkish counterpart Hakan Fidan in Ankara. Berlin had previously blocked the sale of 40 Eurofighter jets to Turkey, with the deal being approved by the government of Friedrich Merz in July. The pair also spoke on the upcoming visit of Merz to Turkey, Turkish-EU relations, the peace plan for Gaza and the war in Ukraine.
Değerli mevkidaşımla Ukrayna'da süren savaşı görüştük.
We discussed the ongoing war in Ukraine with my esteemed counterpart. We exchanged views on possible peace scenarios, how a potential ceasefire could be implemented, and what steps could be taken to end the conflict in line with our shared expectations and perspectives. We also addressed the work of the Coalition of the Willing and assessed its potential contributions to Ukraine's long-term stability. It is of utmost importance that Ukraine preserves its territorial integrity and that the war comes to an end without spreading further across Europe or elsewhere. The conflict has already had a profoundly negative impact, not only on both sides, but also on the European and global economies, including ours, particularly in the area of energy.
Başta enerji sorunu olmak üzere çok büyük bir negatif etki altına girdik.
Dabei müssen wir uns stets vor Augen halten. Russland geht es nicht.
We must not overlook the fact that Russia's concern is not limited to Ukraine. Its aggression targets all of Europe and NATO as a whole. We have often heard this directly from Russia, and we increasingly see Moscow testing NATO's resolve. We must continue our efforts to prevent Putin's dangerous game from escalating and stop money from flowing into Russia's war chest. That is why we are currently working on the 19th sanctions package. The European Union must ensure that this package is not bypassed by companies in third countries. Otherwise, both Europe's and NATO's security interests will be put at risk.
Delegations from Afghanistan and Pakistan arrived in Doha on Saturday to hold high-level talks aimed at ending the intense cross-border hostilities that left dozens dead on both sides. Both countries have sent their defence ministers to lead the negotiations. According to Pakistan, the talks will focus on immediate measures to end cross-border terrorism and restore peace and stability along the border. The conflict intensified after a 48-hour ceasefire which ended on Friday evening. Both nations accuse each other of initiating aggression. Staying on this subject and here to discuss this development is Professor Dr. Ashfaq Ahmed, Chairman of Politics and International Relations Department in Pakistan. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
My first question is, bring us up to date with the current situation around these peace talks and what these two countries hope to accomplish.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Actually, both these countries, they have differing views. For example, if you talk about Pakistan has been trying to convince the Afghan Taliban that they should stop their ideological brothers or TTP, which is Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, and that is an outlawed group. It is also termed to be one of the terrorist group on the UN terrorist list. So Taliban government or interim government Afghanistan, it has not prevented these elements from carrying out strikes against Pakistan. Now, in these strikes, Pakistan is trying to convince the Taliban Afghanistan that they should convince the TPP that they should not be attacking Pakistan, because if you compare the attacks which Taliban carried out last year, the number had been 600. And this year alone, the suicide attacks which TTP has so far carried out are 300. In recent, negotiation, our Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar, he visited Kabul in April to raise the issue. Later, there had been a negotiation between Afghanistan and Pakistan with the help of Chinese government. So far, the mounting attacks against Pakistan, they have not been reduced. So the main objective for Pakistani government in these talks is that that the Taliban based in Pakistan or carrying out attacks against Pakistan, they should be convinced. Taliban of Afghanistan, they should be convinced that these attacks should be prevented. While on the other hand, if you talk about Tehrik-e-Taliban Afghanistan or Taliban regime in Afghanistan, they accuse Pakistan of harboring Islamic State of Khorasan province, which is totally a baseless accusation because in February 2025, one of the ISK operative, he was apprehended in Pakistan and he was sentenced for 31 years in prison. Moreover, there had been attack in 2023 by Islamic State of Khorasan in Pakistan, Bajor area, wherein 60 people were killed. So the point is that both these states, both Pakistan and Afghanistan, they have differing views, and both are trying to convince the other that the proxies should not be used against one another.
Yes, and reports of airstrikes and clashes have continued. Do you think this could deter the peace talks that are happening today?
Okay, now there are two issues in your question. The first of all, the airstrike which Pakistan has carried out, and then the clashes which you're referring to. So the airstrikes which we carried out, or Pakistan carried out, they were carried out in response to the suicide attack, which was carried out in which around 7 were martyred and another 6 were injured. So Pakistan is trying to Pakistan is trying to establish a new normal, convincing the Taliban in Afghanistan that if terrorist activity will be carried out inside Pakistan, they will be carrying out attacks against Tehrik-e-Taliban in Pakistan based in Afghanistan. So this is the overall scenario of airstrikes, and moreover, the first airstrikes which Pakistani Air Force carried out, they were not claimed by Pakistan Air Force, neither Pakistani Foreign Ministry. So this is the whole idea, and moreover, Pakistan Foreign Office, it has already clarified that the attacks were not carried out on the borders, which is 2,600-kilometer long border. Rather, the attacks were carried out inside Afghanistan against the safe havens of TTP. Moreover, there is a technique which is carried out by TTA or Tehrik-Taliban Afghanistan. They open firing, unprovoked firing on the border against Pakistani security forces, and they provide a cover to terrorists so that they can infiltrate in Pakistan and they can carry out strikes. So that was necessary to be carried out.
I see. Well, thank you so much for joining me and for your insight on that. It'll be quite interesting to find out how these talks continue throughout the rest of today. So thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.
Azerbaijan has officially opened the administrative office of its embassy to the Holy See, strengthening diplomatic ties with the Vatican. First Vice President Mehriban Aliyeva and Cardinal Petro Parolin attended the inauguration, highlighting the importance of continued cooperation and dialogue.
The administrative office of Azerbaijan's embassy to the Holy See has officially opened. The ceremony took place on Friday and was attended by Azerbaijan's first Vice President Mehriban Aliyeva and Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin. The new office is on Via della Conciliazione, near St. Peter's Basilica and the Apostolic Palace. This street is also home to several Vatican institutions and the offices of other embassies accredited to the Holy See. Relations between Azerbaijan and the Holy See have developed in a spirit of mutual respect and effective cooperation, expanding across various fields. Following the ceremony, First Vice President Mehriban Aliyeva and Cardinal Parolin exchanged views on bilateral relations, the international agenda, and other matters of mutual interest. Given that the Holy See serves as a spiritual and ideological center for over 1 billion Catholics worldwide, Azerbaijan's diplomatic activities play a particularly important role in promoting the country's realities to the global community.
The second meeting of Azerbaijan-Kazakhstan Supreme Interstate Council will be held in Astana, President Ilham Aliyev said during an interview with a news agency, Kazanform. This comes as both nations aim to strengthen their strategic partnership. According to reports ahead of the visit, discussions will focus on expanding mutually beneficial cooperation and exploring new areas of collaboration. The first meeting of the council was held last year in Baku. Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan are strengthening their long-standing partnership from trade and transport to energy and cultural exchange. Built on shared history and trust, the two Caspian nations have signed more than 160 agreements, turning decades of friendship into a solid strategic alliance. Here's more.
Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan are deepening a dynamic partnership rooted in shared language, culture, and long-standing trust. Since establishing diplomatic ties in 1992, the two nations have grown from friendly neighbours into strategic allies. Regular meetings between President Ilham Aliyev and President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev have turned political dialogue into concrete results from energy cooperation to transport and digital trade. In just the past 2 years, the two leaders have met more than 5 times at major summits from the Organization of Turkic States to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Economic ties are expanding fast. Trade turnover reached $314 million in 2023, up almost 120% from 2020. Energy, logistics, and agriculture drive the exchange, while both sides work to boost cargo through the Middle Corridor, connecting Asia to Europe via Baku and Aktau ports. The partnership rests on a strong legal foundation, 163 agreements signed, including landmark declarations on strategic alliance and mutual cooperation dating back to 2004, 2005 and 2022. With expanding trade, shared projects and deep political trust, Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan are shaping the Caspian into a corridor of stability, energy and unity across the Turkic world.
Looking to regional politics, and Georgia's parliament has passed a set of highly controversial laws that restrict political rights and toughen penalties for protests. Supporters of the bill say they protect stability, but critics warn they could silence opposition and push Georgia further from Europe. Nini Nuklashevi has more.
In a late-night session in Tbilisi, lawmakers from the ruling Georgian Dream Party voted unanimously to approve a sweeping package of amendments critics are calling the most repressive in years. The new laws ban members of any political party dissolved by the Constitutional Court from holding public office, running in elections, or even joining another party. Those who try to help them by admitting them to a party or accepting donations face criminal fines. At the same time, Georgia's protest rules have been rewritten. Covering one's face, blocking roads, or setting up temporary structures during demonstrations can now lead to up to 15 days in detention, 20 for organizers. Repeat offenses become criminal, with possible prison terms of up to 2 years. Even minors could face prosecution. The government insists that these measures are about order and security. Georgian Dream officials argue that they are needed to stop what they describe as foreign-backed attempts to destabilize the country. But rights groups and opposition parties say the laws are designed to intimidate protesters and eliminate political rivals. Former Justice Minister and opposition figure Tina Khidashvili called the package a clear attempt to build a one-party state under a legal facade. Legal analysts warn that the vague wording of the amendments gives authorities broad powers to target critics at will, echoing earlier warnings from the Venice Commission and Human Rights Watch about shrinking civic space in Georgia. Western diplomats have also expressed concern that the legislation could further distance the country from its stated goal of joining the European Union and NATO. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Azerbaijan's village of Khenalik has been named the best tourism village by the UN World Tourism Organization. The award ceremony and the third annual network meeting for 2025 was held in Huzhou in China. The initiative aims to recognize exemplary rural tourism destinations that preserve their cultural and historical heritage while meeting the demands of modern tourism. As a result of the competition, Khenalik has been recognized both nationally and internationally as a notable tourist and cultural historical destination. This recognition is expected to significantly boost its visibility, increase tourist flows, and contribute to the well-being of the local community. Turning to environmental news, the Caspian Sea is shrinking faster than ever before. Scientists are warning that the world's largest inland body of water is facing an unprecedented environmental crisis, causing economic problems as well. Here's what's behind the record decline and what it could mean for millions who live along its shores.
The Caspian Sea, the world's largest inland body of water, is disappearing. New satellite data show its level has fallen to a record low, nearly 30 meters below sea level. Once a cradle of life for 5 nations, the sea is now shrinking at an alarming pace, threatening ecosystems, trade routes, and millions who depend on its waters. Scientists warn this could become one of the century's greatest environmental disasters without urgent action. Satellite imagery from NASA reveals that the Caspian has lost more than 2 meters of water since the 1990s, with the pace of decline sharply increasing since 2020. Scientists say the crisis begins upstream in the Volga River, Europe's longest river stretching over 3,500 kilometers, supplies 80% of the Caspian's water. But in recent decades, its flow has dropped by almost 20% as over 40 dams, industrial use, and expanding irrigation systems divert water before it reaches the sea. Russian agricultural demand, intensified by Western sanctions and warmer, drier conditions, is further depleting the river's discharge, turning what was once the Caspian's lifeline into its greatest vulnerability. Falling water levels are devastating biodiversity. The Caspian seal, found nowhere else on Earth, has lost 95% of its population, with fewer than 70,000 remaining. Sturgeon, source of the world's prized caviar, have lost most of their spawning areas and are near extinction. Environmentalists warn the Caspian crisis mirrors the Aral Sea disaster, but with even greater consequences. The shrinking sea is altering weather patterns, drying wetlands, and accelerating desertification across southern Russia, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan. Exposed seabeds could release toxic dust, threatening air quality and public health. The crisis is also economic. The Caspian has long been a key trade and energy route linking Central Asia with Europe. Ports in Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Russia, Iran, and Turkmenistan face billions in losses. Azerbaijan's Dubendi oil terminal has seen shipments fall, requiring constant dredging. Kazakhstan's Aktau and Kurik ports are also affected, with ships carrying lighter loads or waiting for higher tides. In Russia, shallow waters are disrupting access to the Volga-Don Canal, a vital link to global shipping. The energy sector, the backbone of regional economies, is feeling the pressure. Offshore oil platforms now require longer pipelines and deeper channels. Kazakhstan's Kashagan field, one of the largest in the world, faces mounting operational costs. Experts warn that if the trend continues, the Caspian's northern oil zones could become completely inaccessible. Despite repeated warnings, regional cooperation remains weak. The 2003 Tehran Convention was meant to protect the Caspian, but key protocols on biodiversity and environmental assessment are still largely unimplemented.
Thank you for joining me. That's your news update for now. Make sure you stay tuned to A News for more. Take care.